Dr. Aisha Bennett stepped into the echoing lecture hall of the National Biomedical Review Board, her pulse quickening under the stiff collar of her lab coat. Curved rows of polished desks loomed ahead like a tribunal of quiet judgment. Mostly older, pale faces in dark suits, their expressions unreadable. In her hand, a slim laptop case held 3 years of work, data, images, protocols, and one bold claim. Her enzyme inhibitor could stop the progression of Lyman's neurodegenerative syndrome, LNS. Tonight, she was fighting for the final $2 million in grant funding to begin human trials. When the chairman, Dr. Edward Hargrove, peered over his glasses and invited her to start, Aisha steadied her breath. She activated her first slide, a crisp image of healthy neurons beside the tangled protein clumps that define LNS. Our inhibitor, ENZB7, she said, her voice clear and steady, selectively binds to these misfolded aggregates, restoring synaptic function in 85% of our rodent models. Behind her, the screen shifted to survival charts showing treated mice living 3 times longer than controls. A wave of murmurs spread through the room. She pressed on. She presented motor tests, cognitive behavior scores, and MRI overlays of restored brain function. Then, she paused for the emotional core of her pitch, a short video clip. An elderly patient, Helen Martinez, once motionless, now rising to hug her granddaughter without help. Silence. Aisha scanned the room for a flicker of human response, but saw only guarded faces. When she concluded, Dr. Hargrove tapped his pen, glanced at his colleague's notes, and folded his hands. Dr. Bennett, he said, voice cool, your results are impressive, but our resources are tied to existing partnerships, Pharmac and the Neurogen Consortium. I'm sorry, but we can't fund your proposal at this time. The verdict struck with finality. No one spoke. No follow-ups. No questions. Aisha's chest tightened as she closed her laptop and nodded curtly. As she exited, the board secretary offered a quiet, better luck next cycle. Outside, other researchers murmured condolences. It's just politics, one said, avoiding her eyes. That night, long after the hall had emptied, Aisha sat motionless in her car in the parking lot, replaying the rejection on a loop. Years of testing, rewriting grants, and second-guessing her data, dismissed in 5 cold minutes. But under the sting, something else stirred. Not surrender, resolve. She wouldn't beg again. If institutions wouldn't back her, she'd make the science impossible to ignore. Upstairs in her modest apartment above the lab, she pulled enzyme stocks from the freezer and laid them beside unfinished grant drafts. As the city hummed below, Aisha made herself a silent vow. They can reject a proposal, but they won't reject the cure. With that thought, she turned on the LED glow of her microscope, ready to prove her discovery on her own terms. The morning after the grant rejection, Dr. Aisha Bennett slipped into her quiet campus lab well before sunrise. She wasn't ready to give up, not when her data showed such promise. With calm determination, she powered up the biosafety cabinet and retrieved her private stash of Yenzi B7, freshly synthesized, paid for out of her own pocket. That night, she would test a new delivery method, packaging the inhibitor inside a lentiviral vector capable of crossing the blood-brain barrier. Tom wasn't on her side. She got to work cloning the Yenzi B7 gene into a neuron-targeting viral backbone. She sequenced the construct to confirm it was correct, then used HK293 T cells to produce the viral particles. By midnight, she had a concentrated, purified batch ready for testing. She plated human neural progenitor cells, added the viral cocktail, and tracked it using a fluorescent marker. Over 90% of the neurons glowed, proof that the transduction worked. Her excitement quickly turned to concern. The first cell viability test showed unexpected toxicity at higher doses. The delivery system worked, but it was too harsh. Balancing effectiveness and safety would be critical. For the next 12 hours, Aisha adjusted the promoter strength and fine-tuned the virus-to-cell ratio. By dawn, she'd achieved a new balance. 80% expression, no harmful effects. Watching her treated neurons thrive under the microscope, Aisha whispered to herself. Now they'll have to take notice. With a quiet but fierce sense of accomplishment, she began organizing the data that might soon shake the scientific world. 6 weeks later, guided only by her conviction, Dr. Aisha Bennett stood in the sterile fluorescent light of a small clinical suite at Mercy Memorial Hospital, clipboard in hand. Across from her sat Margaret Lewis, a graceful woman of 52 whose once skilled hands now rested limp in her lap. Diagnosed with advanced Lyman's neurodegenerative syndrome 2 years ago, Margaret's future had narrowed to decline, loss of movement, fading memory. Tonight, she was Aisha's first and only human test subject, and possibly the first proof that ENZ B7 could change everything. Margaret's daughter, Carla, gently held her mother's hand as Aisha reviewed the compassionate use protocol one last time. This vector, Aisha said quietly, tapping the syringe filled with a modified viral cocktail, will deliver the inhibitor into specific neurons past the blood-brain barrier. In mice, we've seen a complete reversal of symptoms. No adverse effects. But I need to be honest, we don't fully know how a human body will respond. Margaret met Aisha's gaze with cautious hope and gave a faint nod. Aisha pulled on sterile gloves and began the infusion through a central line, her breath calm despite the weight of the moment. As the pale yellow solution entered Margaret's bloodstream, the room felt suspended in time. For 48 hours, Margaret was closely monitored. Hourly neurological checks, blood draws to measure immune responses and vector activity, and detailed MRI scans to trace uptake in key brain regions. By day 3, Aisha reviewed the first round of data. No fever, no immune flare-up, stable inflammatory markers, and a slight increase in neuron-specific enzyme levels. Hope flickered. She ran functional tests. Margaret grasped Aisha's hand with a trembly but clear squeeze. She took a few steps using a walker. Then, to Aisha's astonishment, she spoke a full sentence, "I feel lighter." It was her first clear speech in weeks. By the end of the first week, Margaret walked on her own, the first time in 18 months. MRI scans showed the viral vector had successfully reached the motor cortex and hippocampus, the very areas affected by LNS. Her memory test showed a 30% improvement. Her dexterity, measured by the Purdue pegboard, had doubled. Data poured into Aisha's secure server. Each file told a story of change. Word spread quickly. Aisha's independent preprint, once seen as bold and risky, began attracting attention from researchers and clinicians hungry for answers. At a press conference, Margaret spoke clearly and confidently. "It was like waking up from a long sleep," she said, her gratitude unmistakable. When a reporter asked Aisha if she feared legal trouble, she answered plainly, "Science without courage is just paperwork." That night, as Margaret walked unassisted down the hospital corridor toward discharge, Aisha paused to take it all in. The rejection, the secret tests, the sleepless nights. None of it mattered now. Not compared to this moment. A mother reclaimed. A scientist vindicated. A breakthrough undeniable. In the lobby, Carla embraced Margaret with tears of joy. Aisha, watching quietly, allowed herself a rare, wide smile. She knew what would come next: scrutiny, questions, pressure, but she was ready. Just hours after Dr. Bennett's preprint went live, her inbox overflowed with urgent notices. By 7 a.m. the next morning, she found 3 sealed letters stacked on her office desk. One from the university's Institutional Review Board ordering a full stop to all human vector work. One from the FDA demanding complete disclosure of her clinical data and production process. And a third from the University Compliance Office warning that further unapproved trials could cost her medical license. Before noon, campus officials surrounded her in the lab. The Dean of Research delivered a lecture about protocol. University counsel cautioned that lawsuits could ruin the school's reputation. Aisha listened without flinching, her mind reviewing every detail, every essay, every consent form, every sleepless night refining ENZ B7. When they finished, she said quietly, "I'm saving lives." The dean left her with a choice: shut everything down by day's end, or face formal disciplinary action. But Aisha wasn't giving up. That afternoon, she convened an emergency meeting in her cramped office with Dr. Elena Richter from compliance and her attorney, Marcus Lee. They reviewed the FDA's letter line by line. "They want everything," Richter said, tapping her pen. "Full protocol, sequencing data, long-term safety metrics." "I have it ready," Aisha replied. "We just need a way to present it." With Richter's help, Aisha secured a conference call with the FDA's Division of Neurology Products. She spoke directly to Dr. Samuel Ortiz, the lead reviewer. "We understand the need for oversight," she said, "but these patients are terminal. Our compassionate use cases show both safety and extraordinary benefit. We're asking for an accelerated advisory panel within 72 hours. Ortiz, impressed by her clarity and urgency, agreed. By Friday, the FDA had called an emergency meeting of its Neurotherapeutics Advisory Committee, bringing together top neurologists, bioethicists, patient advocates, and Aisha at their headquarters. The hearing room buzzed with tension. Aisha presented her data: 12 patients treated under compassionate use, 11 with major motor improvements, no serious adverse events. MRIs showed targeted delivery. Cognitive function jumped beyond historical benchmarks. For the next 8 hours, the panel fired off questions. They scrutinized vector manufacturing, checked for genome integration risks, and dissected immune response data. Aisha answered everyone. She shared raw data, sequencing reports, even handwritten notes from her lab notebook. 3 patients, including Margaret Lewis, joined via video to share how ENZB7 had brought them back to life. When the committee stepped out to deliberate, the air felt frozen. Then the chairwoman returned. "Given the severity of LNS and the overwhelming clinical evidence," she said, "we recommend immediate launch of a Phase 2 trial under accelerated review, with a target enrollment of 50 patients and an independent safety board." The room exhaled. The FDA committed to issuing guidance within 24 hours, granting Aisha regulatory clearance and forcing the university to reverse its suspension. Back on campus, the IRB abruptly lifted its hold. The same administrators who had once scolded her now offered tentative congratulations. By week's end, her lab buzzed with renewed purpose, this time with institutional support and official FDA oversight. New grants arrived overnight from foundations and advocacy groups eager to help fund the expanded trial. As Aisha reviewed the updated protocol, now including multi-site trials, increased vector production, and external safety monitoring, she paused for a quiet moment of pride. Her work had forced the system to choose rules or lives. They chose lives. By the 3rd week of the Phase 2 trial, Dr. Bennett's lab had become a hub of nonstop activity. Across 4 clinical sites, patients arrived daily to receive infusions of the optimized ENZ-B7 vector under tight safety protocols. But no one expected what happened next. The first interim data set arrived, and it was staggering. Out of 12 patients, 11 showed rapid motor recovery within 48 hours. Tremor scores dropped by 70%. Gait analysis showed near-normal stride patterns. Speech fluency, once limited to scattered words, returned in full sentences. And these were patients who had been wheelchair-bound just days before. Aisha reviewed the numbers in her home office, her eyes scanning spreadsheets, glowing with statistical significance. Across every major endpoint, p-values were below 0.001. There were no serious side effects. MRI scans confirmed consistent distribution of the vector. She could barely contain her excitement. That night, she began drafting a press release, a clear but powerful story, combining raw results with real patient voices. Among them was 65-year-old Marcus Lee, once motionless and silent, now caught on camera dancing with his granddaughter, joy radiating from his face. The clip went viral within hours. News outlets around the world requested interviews. The World Health Organization issued a preliminary statement calling ENZ-B7 a potential paradigm shift in neurodegenerative care. Major pharmaceutical firms, once skeptical, began reaching out for partnerships. But Aisha didn't want exclusivity. She published the vector production methods and safety protocols in an open-access journal. No red tape should stand between people and hope, she said. Meanwhile, advocacy groups held rallies in New York, Tokyo, and Geneva. Social media filled with before and after videos, patients walking, hugging family, feeding themselves. The same grant agencies that once turned her away now rushed to fund her work. The trial expanded, now including 200 patients across 18 countries. One evening, Aisha watched a live stream from the trial safety board. Independent neurologists unanimously voted to recommend fast-track FDA approval. This, the chair said, is the strongest benefit-to-risk profile we've ever reviewed for a neurodegenerative disease. Applause filled the room. Aisha let one joyful tear fall. It wasn't just for the science. It was for the lives reclaimed, the skeptics proven wrong, and the possibility that no one else would have to hear, "There's nothing we can do." In a few miraculous weeks, UNZB7 had transformed from a dismissed idea into a global breakthrough. Proof that bold science, unchained from bureaucracy, could rewrite the future overnight. The wave of success was immediate, and so was the storm that followed. Within days of the Phase 2 results, Dr. Bennett found herself at the center of international attention. Prestigious journals demanded access to her full data sets. Rival labs questioned her methodology. Bioethicists raised alarms about long-term unknowns in human gene therapy. A high-profile editorial in Neurology Today warned that bypassing traditional peer review could set a dangerous precedent. The headlines split in tone. Some hailed her as medicine savior. Others painted her as a reckless disruptor. Even the advocacy groups that had once championed her were now divided. Some praised her bravery. Others feared consequences science hadn't yet mapped. But Aisha didn't flinch. Instead of defending herself in interviews or press conferences, she convened the first-ever Global Safety Consortium in Geneva, a historic gathering under the World Health Organization's guidance. For 3 intense days, top neurologists, immunologists, genetic safety experts, and patient advocates met in plenary sessions and closed-door workshops. Together, they built a shared protocol for multi-year safety monitoring, tracking vector persistence, genome integration risks, and long-term cognitive effects. Aisha presented updated safety data from 200 patients. Still 0 oncogenic events, stable immune profiles, sustained improvement in motor and memory function after 18 months. Every data point was verified by labs in Tokyo, Boston, and Melbourne. On the consortium's final day, who Director General Dr. Elena Martinez addressed the press. "We are urging all member nations," she said, "to adopt ENZ B7 under expanded access programs, with rigorous pharmacovigilance and complete data transparency." By nightfall, Canada, Germany, and Japan had pledged funding to ramp up production under strict global manufacturing standards. Delegates from lower-income nations requested technology transfers to build local production facilities. It was a global pivot, not just toward a cure, but toward shared access. Of course, not everyone relented. A handful of bioethicists filed a formal complaint with the FDA's Human Research Office. Some medical journals published biting editorials on scientific hubris. But each challenge was met with overwhelming data. Peer-reviewed studies confirmed the safety. Patient-led testimony aired before congressional panels. A Lancet Neurology meta-analysis backed it all, showing that ENZ B7 outperformed every previous treatment for LNS. By year's end, over 1,200 patients had enrolled in the global LNS registry, an unprecedented data set. Young researchers worldwide cited Aisha's open access model as a new gold standard. Pharma executives called it a roadmap for ethical, fast-paced innovation. At the closing ceremony, live-streamed in 73 countries, Aisha accepted the inaugural Global Health Pioneer Award. But on stage, she deflected the credit. To every patient who dared to hope, and every colleague who refused to let fear dictate progress. This is your moment. As she stepped down, Aisha knew It wasn't applause that validated her. It was the global network now dedicated to transparency, science, and ensuring no gatekeeper could ever again stand between a patient and their cure. 5 years after ENZB-7 reshaped the world of neurodegenerative medicine, Lyme syndrome had all but vanished from global health watch lists. Dr. Aisha Bennett walked the gleaming marble corridors of the newly inaugurated Bennett Institute for Neurorestorative Medicine, a facility that bore her name but represented far more than one woman's journey. Sunlight poured through soaring windows. Banners fluttered overhead, each honoring a country's first ENZB-7 survivor. Across its many labs, scientists from every continent now worked side by side on the next wave. Treatments for Alzheimer's, spinal cord injuries, and rare genetic disorders. All of it built on the open-source foundation Aisha had fought to protect. That morning, she opened the Institute's first Global Cure Summit. Health ministers, officials, patient advocates, and FDA and EMA representatives filled the room. Behind her, a digital map lit up with over 4,200 treatment centers across 68 countries. Each a point of light, each a life restored. But Aisha didn't start her keynote with numbers. She began with a single face. Margaret Lewis, now healthy, radiant, smiling, the woman who had taken the first leap of faith when no one else would. Hope, Aisha said simply, isn't something you apply for. It's something you build. The summit unfolded over 6 sessions. Nations shared how ENZB-7 had become a part of standard care. Rural clinics described mobile infusion vans reaching patients in remote villages. A nonprofit alliance outlined a tiered pricing model that kept doses under $50, even in the poorest regions. Special education programs presented new data. Children once isolated by illness now learning beside their peers. Families once overwhelmed, now thriving thanks to one scientific breakthrough. In the afternoon, Aisha stepped back on stage to launch the Next Horizon Fellowship, a program supporting early career researchers from underrepresented communities. 12 young scientists joined her on stage. A woman from Lagos, developing nano-delivery systems for blood-borne therapies. A former refugee in Sweden, studying gene editing for muscle disorders. A first-generation student from India, modeling enzyme treatments for rare metabolic diseases. Their faces shone with ambition, the same kind of spark that had once fueled Aisha's first experiments in a dim lab, long before anyone believed in her. Later, she toured the Institute's Patient Innovation Lab, where families co-developed mental health apps and digital support tools. In one corner, a VR setup let patients walk through 3D maps of their healed neural pathways, a visual reminder of how deep the cure reached. Children in bright gowns doodled DNA strands on whiteboards, dreaming of breakthroughs for diseases yet to be named. That night, beneath the summit's glass-ceiling gala hall, Aisha accepted the United Nations Global Health Leadership Award. She took the stage with humility and purpose. We began as a single voice, she said. Dismissed, ignored. But tonight, we are a global chorus. And we declare, no disease is beyond hope, no dream beyond reach, if science, courage, and compassion walk together. Back in her office, as city lights shimmered through the panoramic windows, Aisha sat quietly for a moment. On her desk, a framed letter from a small clinic in rural Peru read simply, "You changed our tomorrow." She smiled soft and full, because in the end, her legacy wasn't measured in awards or headlines, but in every neuron healed, every family reunited, every young researcher inspired to rise and keep going. And as she shut her laptop for the night, Aisha whispered into the dark, "This is just the beginning.